Hey everybody, Taz from Critical Thinking Anarchist here. Just want to give my thoughts on this whole the whole riots and death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So, in case you didn't know, I am from Minnesota. I actually work. I actually work in the area, one of the areas that was affected. I work in the Midway St. Paul area, and my business was actually shut down. I don't own it. I work for a major retailer, but my business was actually shut down Thursday as a result of the protesters. We got all the guests out, got all the employees out, barricaded it up, and got the heck out of there. They have since reopened, but my job was directly affected by this. So again, I want to say that first of all, the death of George Floyd is tragic. Um, whether it was directly as a result of the officer kneeling on his neck or indirectly as a result of his inactions on a guy who is in medical distress, I believe that he is responsible in some way. And I understand the anger and the hurt that is going on because, according to the media, this constantly happens and it seems like a racial issue. Now, since this has happened, there has been information that came out saying that the officer and George both worked at the same nightclub and that they overlapped shifts and may have had some sort of personal interactions that made this particular interaction not a race issue, or at least not a police race issue, but a personal issue between the officer and George Floyd. I'm not going to name the officer. It'll be, in the things that I'm showing, it'll be there. You can see it for yourself. You know it for yourself most of the time. But I'm not going to refer to him. I'm going to try my best not to show his picture. And a lot of people were wondering, why it took so long to arrest the officer. Because when a private citizen, say it was the opposite, say George Floyd was the one murdering somebody else, or it was there for someone else dying and was part of the interaction that led to it, George Floyd likely would have been arrested almost immediately. Part of the difference is when you have a private citizen who doesn't have much power, who doesn't have much status, committing an act like this, it is much easier to gain evidence. It is much easier to get stories straight, and it is much easier for people to tell their side of what happened and give corroborating evidence. So I'm 100% sure that if George were the one on the other side of this, you would have had several people coming out, all going, "Oh, I'll tell you about George. Let me tell you about George," and they would dish dirt on him and give evidence from his past that showed that he was like this. Now, when you're talking police officers and high-ranking officials and business owners, richer business owners, they have resources that the people with lower statuses do not. Part of that is money. And with money comes influence. And when you're talking about things like that, you're talking, lawyers. They can lawyer up immediately. And a lawyer will direct them what to say, what not to say. Now, even if you have a good lawyer, even if you're not that great of a status or whatnot, even if you have a good lawyer, you can still be arrested fairly quickly on these things. And with the evidence that was going on in this particular officer, you had people having cell phone footage, having surveillance footage from stores, having body cam footage, possibly dash cam footage from the cop cars. So, there was a fair amount of evidence, which is partially what led to the arrest being quicker in this case than other cases previous. So you got that going on. But also, the police have their union, and their union is very strong, very large, and will help their officers, right or wrong. Doesn't matter whether you agree with it, doesn't matter what you think of it. You know, a union is there to protect the employees. And also, police have a code amongst themselves that they do not rat on each other. And again, whether you agree with it, right or wrong, that is the way it is. So it's much harder to get corroborating evidence, to get the stories from the other officers saying, you know, A, giving back evidence, and B, giving evidence even on a thing that happened right in front of their faces. They're not going to say anything. Again, which is something that most private citizens don't have. If you do something in front of people, doesn't matter if it's your mom, your dad, you know, your best friend from second grade who's been there for the last 30 years or whatever, chances are if you do something that involves the death of another person, they're not going to protect you. At best, they're going to remain silent and, you know, protect themselves, but they're likely not going to help you out. Obviously, it does happen, and people do get away with things, but most of the time, it does not happen. So, and again, you know, when you're talking CEOs and elected officials and things like that, they get a lot of that same protection. And that's because people depend on them for their jobs, for their safety, for other things that are going on. But so, anyway, the officer was charged, and he was charged with third-degree murder and faces up to 25 years in prison, and second-degree manslaughter. Now, Fox 9, which is a local station in Minnesota in the Twin Cities, gives a good breakdown of the two. So what is third-degree murder? A person commits third-degree murder when the person does not intend to kill another person, but does so by acting recklessly or without regard for human life. The statute reads, whoever, without intent to effect the death of any person, causes the death of another by perpetrating an act eminently dangerous to others and evincing a depraved mind, without regard for human life, is guilty of murder in the third degree. Some defense lawyers believe this charge has legal complexities when the reckless behavior was directed at one person. So in other words, they're saying that what they're charging him with is he didn't mean to kill George Floyd. There was no intent to kill him. He was trying to apprehend him. But his actions led to the death. However, they're saying that his actions were reckless. That he caused the death, to go on my New England accent there for a second, he caused the death of George Floyd by his actions, or inactions. Actually, I think in this case it would be just acting. So in the way he, you know, in this particular case, they're saying him having his knee on his neck and putting the weight on George Floyd is what caused the death of him. And what they're saying is some defense lawyers believe this charge has legal complexities. You know, they're saying, okay, so his action was only directed at one person, and that action was in an attempt to apprehend him. So it could be considered he was acting in the line of duty responsibly and not recklessly. Like, you may not agree with his actions. They may have been more forceful than they needed to be, but they are still within the line of reasonability. And it's hard to prove intent, was he really acting recklessly, or was he just acting stupidly? And I'm thinking, when we get to this a little bit further down the line, it's more likely that they're going, if he got a trial by jury, they would rule that he was acting stupidly, which is why second-degree manslaughter is up there. So, second-degree manslaughter, how is it different from murder? A person commits second-degree manslaughter when their negligence causes another person's death. Manslaughter only requires the person to create an unreasonable risk, while third-degree murder requires the person to act without regard for human life. A person guilty of second-degree manslaughter faces up to 10 years in prison. second degree, and they're talking about why he wasn't charged with the other two versions of murder. Second degree murder is a more serious charge than third degree murder and requires the person to have intended to kill the victim. First degree murder requires the prosecutor to prove the person premeditated or planned on killing the victim. And the thing about that is, right now the family wants to try and charge him with first degree murder. In Minnesota, this is how first degree murder is in Minnesota. I'm not entirely sure what it's like anywhere else, and obviously I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any legal experience or anything like that. My legal experience has come from Law and Order, and actually a little bit from a couple lawyers on YouTube for various things. But in this particular case, in Minnesota, you have to plan on killing the person, which means you have to actually come up with some sort of plan. You have to prove that there was a plan. You have to prove that he went out there knowing that George Floyd was going to be there and wanted to kill him. And that's pretty much impossible. I mean, it's not entirely impossible, but it's mostly impossible. Second degree murder is the closest they could get in Minnesota, because it would then mean that, by his actions, he wanted George Floyd dead. He was intending to kill him, but he didn't plan on killing him. He didn't go out there knowing that George Floyd was there and go, I'm going to kill this guy. This guy is dead, and I finally get to get him. So first degree murder is pretty much out of the question. Second degree murder would require them finding some sort of thing where he wanted him dead. And that goes to causation. So when we look at the medical examiner's report here, so this is on legalinsurrection.com. I don't know the veracity of this website. But they do have, these are genuine copies of the charges that were filed against the officer. And then this is a genuine report from the preliminary medical examiner. The autopsy revealed, actually, it might actually be the full report. Oh, no, it is the preliminary. The autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. So, in other words, what they're saying there is that the officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck wasn't what killed him. He didn't die from asphyxiation. He didn't die of strangulation. He died because he had other health issues. And the strain of being arrested and being pinned down and the anxiety and everything else is, again, preliminarily what caused his death. And they also state that any potential intoxicants, because they haven't done the full autopsy yet, they haven't done, check for drugs and things like that to see what effect those might have had. So that could also affect everything. And that is what could determine what gets pushed. Now, if he gets a trial by jury, if the officer gets a trial by jury, juries tend to go for a lesser charge, especially when you're talking police officers. They tend to go for a lesser charge because they're a police officer. They're in a strenuous job and they go through all this stuff, and it's not always their fault. Whether we agree with it or not, that's not what's at issue here. What is at issue is what they can prove legally. So what they're saying is, right now, preliminarily, it was a cause of his underlying health conditions, possibly any drugs or alcohol in his system affecting those, as well as the strain. So this makes the third degree murder charge less likely to stick. But a second degree manslaughter charge there are 5 things that you have to prove. You only have to, or you can prove, you only have to prove one of them. And they could prove that his negligence, that George Floyd calling for help, and if they had tried to get him into an ambulance and a hospital quicker, that they could have possibly saved his life. So that is likely to be the cause here, or likely to be the case here, is that the officer that's arrested, whether he'll get both charges or whether he'll see one dropped, and again, this also depends on what other evidence they can get in the meantime. But what is likely to happen is that the officer will get the manslaughter conviction. But again, that doesn't quite go to what takes so long in all of this. Why does it take so long? So again, why it takes so long is you want to make sure that the person you're arresting, gets the highest charges possible, which requires usually an autopsy, a full autopsy report, because you want to be able to prove everything, and you want to get them on murder 3, murder 2, murder 1. You want to get the history of that person that you're arresting so that you can build a case that says, not only did this person do this, but he has a history of being bad, and we're going to show you how bad he is to help us prove that he deserves the highest possible punishment when it comes to this particular case. And along with that, you want to make sure that they have a fair trial. And that is going to be the next part I'm going to talk about, because you have a lot of people all of a sudden saying that he's guilty. You have the mayor of Minneapolis saying being black in America should not be a death sentence. For 5 minutes, we watched a white officer press his knee into a black man's neck. 5 minutes. That officer failed in the most basic human sense. And he goes on to say, if most people, particularly people of color, had done what a police officer did late Monday, they'd already be behind bars. That's why today I'm calling on Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman to charge the arresting officer in this case. So in other words, right there, he's saying this officer is guilty. And not only is he saying he's guilty, he's saying it's a race issue. He has no history of the officer. And twice he has said it's black on white. This is a white mayor, by the way, or possibly Jewish. I don't know. I saw somewhere that said shalom to him. So I can't be sure if that's just because that person was Jewish and they're saying peace, or if they're saying that Jacob Frey is. I don't know. I don't care. But still, this is not a black man saying this. This is a person not of color saying that, hey, us white people are privileged and we're wrong and we're bad for being privileged. And but the problem is he's part of the problem. He is the mayor. He is the leader of Minneapolis. He is the one that should be in the front of all of this. He should be the first one asking for calm, asking for peace, asking for things to be done properly. We can't turn a blind eye. George Floyd deserves justice. Black community deserves justice. His friends and family deserves justice. The city deserves justice. If we have a cop going around killing people, the city deserves the justice. The city should be the one making sure that officer has never has a chance to do any of this again. I don't care what his race is. By the way, 4 officers were involved in this. Now, one was, again, directly or indirectly responsible for the death. The 3 other officers, Asian, black, Hispanic. This is not a race issue. Our leader of Minneapolis is making it a race issue. But again, point of this being that you have the mayor calling him guilty, asking him to be charged, calling him guilty. Which then leads to the governor, Tim Walz, calling him guilty, which then leads to later Donald Trump, the president of the United States, calling him guilty before he was even arrested, or even when he was arrested. It doesn't matter. He still hasn't gone to court yet. He still hasn't gone to court. In America, it is innocent until proven guilty. I don't care what video you have. I don't care how many eyewitnesses you have. I don't care if he did it in front of the chief of police, the mayor of Minneapolis, the governor of Minnesota, and the president of the United States all at the same time. He has to be tried fairly. He has to have a presumption of innocence until he is prosecuted. The jury is what gets to decide whether he is guilty or not. Or, if he chooses, the judge gets to decide that. The defense attorney represents him and helps him presume innocence. The prosecuting attorney builds their case and attempts to prove their guilt. With the medical examiner's findings, it's going to be tough to prove anything. And again, we haven't got the full report yet, but right now it's going to be tough proving anything more than manslaughter too. And then if it comes out that there were drugs and alcohol or other things involved, it's going to be even worse. Mantu would be the best case scenario right now. Right now, Mantu is the most likely scenario. But more than that, where does the officer get a fair trial? He has high-ranking elected officials. He has the President of the United States calling him guilty. Where is he getting a fair trial? And that is why it takes so long to get people arrested when they have some sort of authority or power or status. Because you don't want these people weaseling out of these charges. Right now, a defense attorney could say that he will not have a fair trial anywhere in the United States. And he wouldn't necessarily be wrong. It's very, very, very likely that the trial would have to be moved from Minneapolis and likely even Hennepin County. Hennepin County, for those of you who don't know, is where Minneapolis is located in Minnesota. It's the county that Minneapolis is located in. This is the biggest problem that is going to face this officer right now. And a lawyer, a smart lawyer, would call for a speedy trial. Now, obviously, they have to wait a reasonable amount of time for certain things to come to light. They would likely have to wait for the second autopsy, the independent autopsy that the family is calling for, and the results of that. But if that autopsy corroborates the medical examiner's findings, then it's not going to be difficult. You have, again, high-ranking elected officials going after him. You have the public going after him. Now the next part of this whole thing. So that's my thoughts on that. So George Floyd should not be dead as a result of this. We don't know, again, if he does truly have intoxicants in his system, along with everything else that was going on. It's possible he may have died that night anyway, or very shortly after. But he shouldn't have died as a result of being in police custody. And the officers should have done a better job of attempting to seek medical help. Now the next part. My city, my state is literally burning to the ground. Over the last week, we have had riots and terrorism. and they are terrorists. They are assholes. They are terrorists. And I don't mean the protesters. The protesters are absolutely right in protesting. They're absolutely right in peacefully trying to get justice. That is as it should be. That is the way it's meant to be. The problem comes when you add violence and destruction. More people have died now as a result of these than the obvious one person who died because of a very, very stupid act. There have been people who have been killed all over the country for either looting and rioting or defending the stores and businesses and people. People are being beaten. People are being killed. People's lives are being destroyed. And nobody has done anything about it. Now, whether these are organized by the KKK and Black Panther and whatever else, I don't know. There has been a lot of unconfirmed organization going on, but nobody has really proven that it really is outside forces, that they really are bad actors, that they are really, hate groups, that they are really Russians coming in to influence everything. Right now, that is all unconfirmed. So I can't say whether or not that is true. What I do know is that I have been affected directly by this. I have watched as other businesses have been destroyed. And it's not just Target. It's not just Holiday. It's not just AutoZone. These are a list of buildings damaged and looted in Minneapolis and St. Paul. This is by BringMeTheNews.com. We're talking Mama Sophia, Bismillah Grocery and Coffee, Cruxlow Restaurant, Safari Beauty 30th. Safari Beauty, Speedway, which was formerly Super America, Basilica of St. Mary's. The Basilica of St. Mary's. The Basilica in Minneapolis is very well known. It is one of the iconic landmarks in Minnesota. Now, I'm not personally religious, but, pretty much anyone in the Twin Cities and a lot of Minnesota knows the Basilica. And it is a gorgeous, amazing building, let alone the religious aspects of it, let alone the faith of the people that's in there. I'll say this, it's kind of a second-tier version in Minnesota, to Minnesotans, what Notre Dame is to France. Again, not quite that high, but there. Knepp and Hackert Law Firm, pharmacy in town, Blue Tree Music Education, True's Popcorn, Domino's, Popeyes, Boost Mobile. No, I mean, again, Dreamhaven Comics, as if the comics industry hasn't had enough to work with. Liquor stores, gas stations, grocery stores, Family Dollars, all these places. And the thing is, some of them, yes, some of them are large corporations and they have insurance and they will be able to rebuild and they'll be as good as they ever were if they decide to come back. Some of them will, some of them will not. A lot of these are independently owned. Even the franchise ones, they're independently owned. Like, yes, they're part of, Speedway. I don't know if Speedway is a franchise or not, but they're part of a larger chain, but they're still owned by a single person. They're still more or less mom and pop shops. And even more than that, a lot of these are first, second, third A lot of these are first, second, third generation immigrants that own these. They're African Americans, they're Hispanics, they're, you know, retirees. Yes, there are several white places as well, but a lot of these places are independently owned. These are not chains. These are innocent people. These are not the people who caused any of the problems. It's not like this is just a war against these people and the police, or even a war against these people and Target. For why Target of all places is the place to go after. I don't know, except for the big screen TVs and a big deal. But these places are not the places that have ever been a problem to anybody. The owners of these places, the employees of these places, they can't just go, you know, Target at least, and several of the other large corporations, they have other stores that they can send people to continue working. And their insurance will help pay for the repairs in the building and coming back in a year or two. Now, whether those employees will stick around or whether they'll say, you know what, I just don't feel safe anymore, that's up to them. But a lot of these other places, North End Hardware, Neighbors One Stop, Plaza Mexico, Yusuf Center, I mean, these are not places that are going to have other businesses to just send their employees to. So, including, you know, disrupting dozens of large corporations and hundreds of people's jobs, you're now destroying hundreds of people's lives. They now have to find new jobs. They now have to go somewhere else. You know, these places are neighborhood places. These places are where African Americans and Hispanics and Asians and Hmong, you know, this is where these local people got their food, got their gas, got their money, went to work. And now those places are gone. For a lot of these people, their only mode of transportation is either walking or the bus. So now instead of going a couple blocks down the road to get groceries, the next closest place is 5 miles away by bus. If they're lucky. If they're lucky that the bus route goes that way. So now they have to rely on another place that hopefully isn't destroyed. If that is still there, they have to rely on that place to get their food. They have to travel by bus to get there. They have to be safe on that bus to get there. By the way, bus travel this weekend suspended because of the riots. Bus and train travel. So there are no buses going around anywhere for people to get food. So now they have to take an Uber, they have to take a taxi, they have to take a Lyft. They have to have one of their friends or relatives help them. If they have friends or relatives that can help them. Thankfully, the support in both Minneapolis and St. Paul has been astounding. People have been there helping, donating food, donating groceries, donating money when possible, helping transport people, helping clean up the rubble and the damage in the buildings. To show you how bad it was, in St. Paul, not Minneapolis, in St. Paul, from May 28th to May 29th, 8 a.m. Thursday to 8 a.m. Friday. This is the second day of the unrest. 295 calls for service, 169 EMS calls, 126 fire calls. 24 hours. The first big one of the 24 hours. And that's, again, St. Paul. Most of the damage was in Minneapolis. I don't have the numbers for Minneapolis. I have the numbers for St. Paul. But figure it's probably close to double. One of the worst parts was that Mayor Jacob Frey let the 3rd precinct, the 3rd police precinct, where the officer was arrested or was employed, he let that be destroyed by people, by these terrorists. Governor Walz says he was told early yesterday, on the 28th, on Thursday, by Minneapolis Mayor Frey, they would likely let the 3rd precinct fall. He didn't agree with it, but it wasn't his call. He's the fucking governor of the fucking state, and he can't override a fucking mayor. And excuse my language, and excuse my shouting at this. But when you have a governor who says, oh, it's not my call, that's the mayor's call. What do you mean it's the mayor's call? How does he get to call that? He's lower than you. You're higher than him. You have the ability to do something. Why wasn't something done? Why weren't the National Guard called in at that time? Why weren't they called in earlier? Because I have it on a source of mine that they actually knew, even earlier than they said they knew, that the 3rd precinct was going to be attacked, and that Mayor Frey had made the decision to let it go because he wanted to appease people. He thought it would be good symbolism. He thought that it would then be over. It would be done. Mayor Frey, this asshole, this piece of shit, let his precinct go because he thought that was the best move. He endangered lives. He endangered police. He endangered anyone that those police help in that precinct. Because now the 3rd precinct is gone. Now those police officers have to come from somewhere else in order to complete their service. So if any calls come in the 3rd precinct, they're coming from another precinct to help out that precinct, which takes longer. The reason why you have precincts is because you have a certain service time that you're trying to get to. When a call comes in, you want your officers able to help out as quickly as possible. You don't want them waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour, an hour for a police officer to show up because they had to come from fucking Duluth. And it would take way longer to come from Duluth, but the point is, from a faraway place. So it takes about 15 minutes to come from St. Paul. Driving, no traffic, no protesters on the road blocking the roads. 15 minutes to go from downtown St. Paul to downtown Minneapolis, straight shot, nothing in the way. Again, I don't know where the precincts are located. I don't have a map of, I could probably pull up a map, but I'm not going to pull up a map of where all the precincts are and how they're located and what the service times actually are between everything. Again, you had a mayor who made a call, and you had a governor that did not override that call. This is why President Trump got involved in the first place, because you had incompetent leadership in Minnesota making bad decisions. And what did this decision lead to? Did it lead to everybody going, okay, so now the officer's arrested, now the 3rd precinct is gone, we're all happy. We got it out of our system. Thanks for letting us blow off some steam. We're done. We're out of here. Peace out. No! God, that would have been nice, wouldn't it? That would have been amazing. That would have been amazing if that had happened. And of course, looters, as you can see on the top there, looters running out of the 3rd precinct with police jackets and riot gear. They had a large amount of time. Even if it was only the 5 hours that they say they knew, which it was much, much longer than that, you should be able to get all that stuff out of there. You should be getting all the guns out of there, all the protection gear out of there. That place should pretty much be abandoned. It should be stripped. You call all your officers in, say, hey, get it all in there, get it all in the vehicles, get it out. If you're going to do this, which you should never do. But if you were going to do it, you should strip that place before the rioters and the terrorists get in there. So now what happens? So now, over the last 5 days, Wisconsin Mayor believes up to 75,000 agitators headed to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Initial intelligence came from the Minnesota Fusion Center. Now, it's been said a lot over the past couple days that, we didn't have enough, even activating the National Guard, they didn't have enough people. Because when they first activated National Guard, they had about 1,000 National Guard members. And they had about 800 police officers between state troopers, sheriffs, officers on duty, and whatever, whomever else they had sworn in and available. So they had about 1,800 people between Thursday and Friday night. Thursday and Friday night, they were strictly in contain. Strictly just keep the firefighter safe, keep the police officer safe. They barely arrested anybody because they couldn't. They just simply didn't have the people to do it. And if you're talking about this 70 to 75,000 people, now granted, again, I'm not entirely sure if this is, I haven't read this. So I'm not entirely sure if this is 70 to 75,000 coming in to Minnesota, and things are still going to get worse over the next few days, or if that's, which I'm guessing that's what it's actually kind of saying. I don't know how many people we've had out before that. But again, when you say you have 1,800 officers and National Guard members, and that's not enough because they still number you by the several thousands, that ought to tell you we have, somewhere between 5,000 and apparently 75,000 people out there causing destruction and mayhem. And then on top of that, so you've got 75,000 people apparently on their way right now. Now, last night was the quietest night since this all began. That's because they implemented the curfews and they shut down all the highways within the Twin Cities area. So highways 35E, 35W, 94, which, so Highway 35E and 35W run north and south on two different sides of the cities. 94 runs more or less through the heart of both downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis. I believe Highway 36 was in there as well. So all the major highways within the city's area. And that was between the curfew and that was what led to them finally having a fairly quiet night and being able to really quell the people. Again, I want to point out the protesters have been very peaceful, have been very respectful. They do their part, and then at 7:55 or 7:50 or whatever, they get out of there. And it's been shown, it's been documented, it's been shown. The protesters are not the problem, and I don't have a problem with the protesters. The protesters have every right to do what they're doing. They have every right to be upset. They have every right to chant, to shout, to go after the elected officials and the police. It's the rioters and the terrorists who are literally destroying people's lives that I have the problem with, and that you should have the problem with. They are the ones who don't care about George Floyd being dead. They are the ones who don't care that the officer was arrested. They don't care if the next 3 officers get arrested and charged as well. Even if they were all convicted immediately, they still wouldn't care. They would still be out there doing this because all they care about is chaos. All they care about is destroying people's lives and apparently stealing TVs. Good thing this didn't happen when we first had the pandemic because they would have stolen all the toilet paper. And then none of the hoarders would have been able to get it. Anyway, that's my take on it. Thanks for listening. And just be safe out there. Take care of yourselves. Help out if you can. But don't be a part of this. Don't encourage anyone to be a part of this. If you know anyone that's a part of this, get them home.